how do you deal with a left-hander when you've never had one before? Because it's a very right-handed world and people don't tend to think about it. Um, if you reflect that number nationally to the number of children in schools in England, there are over 1 million left-handed children currently in schools, and there's nothing in teacher training about it. There are actually some very simple things that you can do which don't cost a penny. For example, where you sit a child in the class, they're not knocking elbows with a right-hander, and actually you're benefiting both children, not just the left-hander. You can be right-eye dominant but left-handed and right-footed, so you can be a whole mishmash.
Hello, and that was Mark Stewart, and he's got a business called Left and Right, which started 30 years ago when he was looking for a pair of left-handed scissors to support his son. Now, this has obviously carried on over that number of time. The business has changed, obviously, as life has moved on, but really important conversations, both in terms of providing products for people who are left-handed, but also within the education field. And he explains how he's been working through schools and organisations to kind of really make left-handed people an integral part of people's thinking and indeed teacher training. Really hope you love this conversation with Mark Stewart. Hi, Mark. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Education on Fire podcast. This is a subject that we haven't actually talked about before on the show, which is fascinating to me, bearing in mind we have a child who's left-handed and the implications that come with that, and the kind of the decisions about whether to being left-handed you should try and do it right-handed, or how it affects schooling and learning and all of that sort of stuff. And he's now in university, so we've been through the whole sort of cycle. So yeah, fascinating conversation, and I'm really looking forward to diving in.
Well, thank you very much for asking me. So we have both Christian names the same, and a similar family situation. If I give you a little bit of history about why I started, was my youngest son, who's the left-hander. Ironically, my wife and I, and eldest son, are all right-handed, and my wife is an ex-teacher, which had an effect on our journey. But Robert, the youngest, he's now 35, something like that. He's a paramedic. And when he came along, we had a big surprise because we hadn't considered having a left-hander. We didn't really know anything about left-handers. There was nobody on my side at all who's left-handed. And actually only my father-in-law on my wife's side. But he was of the generation that sadly were forced to write right-handed. Which thankfully doesn't happen anymore in this country, but I can tell you more globally later. And it was he is very left-sided, so he's left-eyed, left-handed, left-footed. And we could tell very early with him because we'd put him in the high chair, for example, put a spoon in his right hand as far right as you want, and it would go straight to his left. So he is really very, very left-sided, dominant. Very well coordinated, and so we thought, well, how can we help? Gosh, how do you deal with a left-hander when you've never had one before? Because it's a very right-handed world, and people don't tend to think about it. So when Robert was about 4, we were looking for a pair of left-handed scissors for him, and we couldn't find anywhere in Worcester that sold them. And I knew of a shop in London called Anything Left-Handed, and the situation was that I was sort of looking for new employment as well. And literally after about 6 or 8 weeks, we had opened our bricks and mortar shop in Worcester. And we were the first ever franchise, I guess you'd call it, branch of Anything Left-Handed outside of London. So that was coming up 30 years ago in December. And it's been quite a journey since then.
It's an amazing story, and like I say, like an early franchise kind of situation as well, and on the sort of the, I guess, the biology of it, like I say, a surprise having a left-hander with a family of right-handed people. In terms of your sort of experience and research and all the things I know you've done over the years, is there any particular reason why one person becomes left-handed as opposed to right-handed?
Not necessarily. You can't be cast iron about it. It's usually hereditary, but not necessarily. You can become left-handed through accident, through stroke, The drug thalidomide caused a lot of children to be born with upper limb deficiencies. Often in twins, you'll get one left and one right because they're sort of mirror image within the womb. But there is no hard and fast rule that says you will have a left-hander. And I guess out of a certain number of people, you are bound to get a left-handed child. The sort of statistics would say that there is research about genetics, um, but I can't say I know the ins and outs of that. Um, but it's interesting to know. Thinking about numbers, there are a couple of things I can tell you on that. I used to go to a special needs conference in Norwich, and a lady there, a reception teacher, came up to me, and we were discussing children, left-handed children. And I said, how many have you got in your class or your year? And she said, out of her year of 90 children, she had 60 left-handed, six
Wow.
zero, not 16. And I went back the following year and said, are you sure? Are you sure it's 60? And she said, yes, definitely. The other interesting thing, and probably more critical in certainly in my perspective, is that back in, I think it was 2006, our member of parliament at the time, a chap called Peter Luff, who is left-handed and who writes with a sort of hook style of writing. Um, he tabled a couple of parliamentary questions, and the responses to them from the Department of Education were that the department does not collect information on what proportion of pupils are left-handed, nor on whether being left-handed has an impact on likely educational achievement. So frankly, they haven't got a clue. Um, the same questions were repeated in 2016 by the Mid Worcester MP Nigel Huddleston with exactly the same responses. And over the years, we've had meetings with people at the department, and it's just brushed off. And it's how can you make any real proper diagnosis, I guess, or consideration to left-handers if you haven't got a clue how many left-handers there are in the country? If you take roughly, say, 13%, in fact, Worcestershire LEA did a survey back in the early 2000s, and it worked out to 13%. If you reflect that number nationally to the number of children in schools in England, there are over 1 million left-handed children currently in schools. And there's nothing in teacher training about it. The last national curriculum was quite interesting. I had a meeting with Nick Gibb, who produced the national curriculum, and there's a bit on handwriting in that, which is statutory. So for right-handers, you've got to do this. And then underneath that, it says left-handers should have appropriate guidance. And that was non-statutory. So it was a sort of afterthought. Oh, yes, handwriting is really important. Left-handers, well, they should have something done to it, but, let's not worry too much about it. Which I thought was appalling. And I said to him, it should be must, not should be, not should. The word should be must have appropriate guidance. And he said, well, the word should does have some impetus, and I couldn't disagree with that. But I thought it must be done. And I think also possibly the fact that generally teachers haven't been trained to help left-handed children. That if you have it must, then you require the training to go with it. So I've had some input into the new curriculum and assessment review. So we'll see whether anything comes of that or not. But it's going to be very interesting to see.
And it is slightly mind-boggling, especially sort of in more recent years as well, with the whole thing about equal opportunities and equity, diversity. Well, you are at a disadvantage if you're in a class which is set up as a right-handed class. If you are left-handed, like you say, if you don't have left-handed scissors, if you're not able to be taught to write in the same way, you don't have the same opportunities to express yourself as a left-handed person, if that's sort of naturally how you are. So it sort of begs the question, isn't it, that, why has it not been sort of more in the forefront of people's minds, and certainly, like I say, going forward with the new government and their plans as well?
Yes, certainly. I mean, Robert, for example, the first week at school was given a pair of right-handed scissors to use. And when we went to pick him up at the end of the day, every other child had got their picture on the wall. Robert hadn't even cut it out because he couldn't. And I don't think that's good enough because the child can end up thinking not what's wrong with the scissors, but what's wrong with me. And the self-esteem just goes wallop,
Yeah,
you know. And it's simple things. Funnily enough, literally in the last couple of months, I've had some fascinating quotes from a teacher and a head teacher, and the head teacher said, "My best friend's daughter is left-handed, and I was only this week discussing how schools are not set up for left-handed learners and the difficulties faced." And from a teacher, "I've been teaching for 10 years and have never considered support that might be required for left-handed learners."
it's incredible, isn't it?
I mean, I'm not a teacher, I'm just a right-handed parent. But to me, that's appalling. That in this day and age, our education system isn't dealing with, over 10% of the school population.
Yeah, and I think in some way the grey area is also really important, like I say, especially if you don't have the training, because I know certainly in our situation, while our son was left-handed, as in he would write with his left hand, which was, like I say, has all sorts of sort of struggles and things to go with it sometimes as well. He also lives his life playing and being a right-handed person in some elements. I know sport was a great example of, holding a tennis racket might be different than holding a cricket bat or holding a golf club or throwing a ball or kicking a ball. There wasn't that kind of dominance that everything has to be left-handed. There's some crossover there somewhere, which I think is genuinely confusing. And I think actually at that point, sort of at school, like we said, having someone who could just say, well, let's think about this, actually take you on a little journey of kind of, well, experiment this way, experiment that way, see what works, which of course you sort of do in your own way. But that kind of takes time, it takes impetus. And of course, I think in the educational situation, very often time's of the essence, isn't it? We're doing this in this class now, the match is tonight, the training is now kind of thing. And you don't necessarily have that time to put those sorts of things in place.
Yes, I quite agree. I mean, there are actually some very simple things that you can do which don't cost a penny. For example, where you sit a child in the class, they're not knocking elbows with the right-hander. And actually, you're benefiting both children, not just the left-hander there. But you mentioned the likes of cricket and golf. And that's quite interesting because they are what I would term double-handed activities. And if I'm being asked by a parent, for example, how can I check whether my child is right or left-handed? I would always say disregard double-handed activities. And if you think about eating as well, this was really interesting from our perspective with Robert. So as a baby or as a young child, as a right-handed person, you put the food to your mouth with your right hand. You're then told with a knife and fork, no, you're not going to do that. You've got to put the fork in your left hand and then try and get the food to your mouth with your left hand, which isn't your natural hand. And what Robert used to do, he'd put the knife on the food and sort of tear with a fork. But he was relatively happy doing that because he was doing what he'd done from birth. That was putting the food to his mouth with his dominant hand. So, as I say, and with batting at cricket and golf, you can actually bat right-handed or in the right-handed way without using your right hand if you have to, because actually it's the left arm that does the main work in controlling. So some left-handers have come in and said, "Oh gosh, I do one thing one way and one the other." And I think that's actually perfectly logical. There's a reason behind it, and it's the terminology that's not correct rather than how you're doing it. So I've found that quite interesting over the years.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think the conversations we had was that neither of them felt natural in a way that some activities sort of felt natural, and I guess then that just becomes practice and making a decision of the best way to do
Here are
it.
a couple of things that everybody can do who's watching this, and in the training that I do, and that's another thing. When I do my training, I sort of get imposter syndrome because A, I'm not left-handed, and B, I'm not a teacher. But it's fascinating and really interesting and reinforces what I say because there's some left-handed teachers on the courses, and they say, "Oh gosh, yeah, I had that issue, and I have the other issue," and you think, "Wow, okay, so it's real. These are real problems that children particularly face. And being a right-handed parent, a right-handed person, if I know how to get it sorted out, it can't be that difficult, can it? But anyway, let's go back to the laterality questions, which are rather fun. And we'll go through one or two. And if I was to say, okay, well, I'm male, I'm follically disadvantaged, I'm
Don't know what you're
right-handed.
talking about, but carry
So, for example, put your hands together, one on top of the other. Which thumb is on the top? Now I'm doing that, and I'd say I'm right-handed, but actually it's my left thumb that's on the top. Oh, okay, well that's a bit odd. I'm slightly surprised about that. Okay, how about folding your arms? Which arm is on the top?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because it was my right hand which actually was on the top when I did it.
Right, yes. So you think, okay, well that's a little bit odd. But if you try it the other way, it's just completely unnatural, isn't it?
Yeah.
Gosh, it does feel really odd. There's a fun one I do at the end, which is hopping up and down on each leg, which seems the easiest to hop on. So it's which hand, looking at which eye you might be dominant with, and that was really interesting, and gave us another view into the different dominances that you have. I had a little lad came in, and he must have been, I don't know, 5, 6, something like that, came into our shop, and we had a toy shop, but a little left-handed section. And we got a kaleidoscope, and I said, "Have a look through it. Pretend to be a pirate. Go, ah." Anyway, he picked it up and went slap bang in the middle. I thought, "Oh, right, okay, haven't seen that one before." But his dominance obviously hadn't been defined eye-wise, and it's really interesting because you can be what's termed cross-lateral. And I'll repeat what I said earlier. Robert is really well coordinated. So he's left-eyed, left-handed, left-footed. But you can be right-eye dominant, but left-handed
Right.
and right-footed. So you can be a whole mishmash. And I think that's really quite useful for teachers and parents to understand. Because, for example, I had a lady came in and she said, whenever I go to catch a ball, I put my hand out to where I think it is. But because I'm right-eye dominant, and my left hand, they don't coordinate together, so I keep on missing the ball. So if you have a child, for example, who may be a little bit clumsy or not too well coordinated, it is well worth checking which eye hand are the dominant ones. So the child is, although they may be being clumsy, there is a reason behind it, and you can't just shout as we were in our childhood saying, "Don't be so clumsy, just get on with it." There is a reason why. I say not that you can solve it, but at least you have that understanding. And I think, and that sort of awareness, and I think the awareness is one of the key things that's missing nowadays. And I'd say further, there's what I would term passive discrimination. And what I want is that the education system should be more proactive and helpful, and as you said in your piece, equality in policy, in training and resources. So you give the left-handed child an equal opportunity to achieve their full academic potential.
Yeah, it's so important. And the awareness thing I think is fascinating. And just going back to the eating piece that we were chatting about, I get ridiculed at home because I'm very right-handed. I'm a musician and I'm a drummer, so I do a lot of things sort of ambidextrously, as it were. But I always have used my right hand to hold my fork for exactly the reason that you mentioned, because it seems to do all the work. It's doing all the moving around, and you're taking it to your mouth, and it seems illogical for me to then do it the other way around. And they say, but when you're sort of carving a Sunday lunch or something like that, you hold your knife in your right hand. And I said, yes, because at that point I'm doing the most important thing with my dominant hand. I can just put the fork into the meat, for example, and then it's my right hand that's doing the carving and needs the dexterity in order to do it. And it makes perfect sense to me, other than, like you say, no, traditionally it has to look a certain way. But it's something which comes up a lot.
I think lots of left-handers said, "Blow you, I'm going to carry on doing what I've done from birth." And I think in the States as well, for example, they put the knife on the food, or they cut with the knife using their dominant hand, put that down, and then pick up the fork and then feed them like
Yeah.
that. So again, they're using these dominant hands, but it's something that, say, as right-handers, we wouldn't have given a second thought until Rob came along. And
Yeah.
I say my wife's an ex-teacher, and there is no blame on the teachers, because if you're not trained, if you're not aware of what is needed, then you can't really help them. But I
Yeah.
think it's really sad for the child, so
Yeah, it's important, and
it's
that's why I love these conversations, and why it's so fabulous to be talking about it on the podcast, because there'll be people listening in exactly that situation who hopefully will at least, like I say, gain that awareness and think a little bit more about how that may work in their classroom. But tell me a little bit more about your shop and its sort of evolution, like say over the 30 years or however long, in terms of the sorts of things that you were originally stocked, things which may have changed over those years, and then I know in terms of books and resources, and like I said, your workshops and things you do, how sort of you've evolved over that time as well.
Yes, thank you. We started open in 1994. We had a very small shop in New Street in Worcester, and we were there for 5 years before we moved around the corner, and we started a franchise, or we joined a franchise called Formative Fun, which was an educational toy shop with really great stuff, wooden toys, some maths, English, science. Your good old fashioned toy shop, which we thoroughly enjoyed having. But I wanted to keep my left-handed section. So as you came in the door, on the left-hand side was the left-hand section, of course. So we were there for 20 years, and we closed the bricks and mortar shop in 2021, I think it was. This COVID messes up my years. I can't think what's when.
Exactly.
Um, but we'd felt it was time to move on with that. Having noticed and having had the parliamentary questions with our MP, and we noticed we were getting a lot of children, particularly coming in with handwriting difficulties, and there seemed to be a space for us to fill, as it were. There was nothing in teacher training. We got in contact with the chief executive of the teacher training agency, and we decided to produce a training video. This was 1999, and it was in VHS. And we had a meeting with the teacher training agency, and they said they would send it out to all the teacher training colleges in England. And I thought, yes, we're really getting somewhere here. Sadly, the teachers were not, or the trainee teachers were not required to view it. So it didn't help them, and worst of all, it didn't help the children they were going to be teaching. So to be perfectly frank, it was probably a waste of time and money. But you live and learn. And what we did afterwards, that we had funny enough, one day we had a guy came in, or a mum and a lad came in, and I was sorting out their child's handwriting. And a chap came in who was publisher of the Left-Handers Handbook. And the child had come in fairly down in the mouth and didn't really want to be there, and what's all this about? Anyway, I managed to sort out his handwriting. It usually takes me 15-20 minutes, and once they've got it, they're sorted for the rest of their life. But anyway, the publisher saw it, and we had a chat afterwards, and I said, that there is a little bit on handwriting for the left-handed child. There was a Ladybird book on handwriting. But I said, I'd really like to write a proper book on left-handed handwriting, so they get a good technique and that sort of thing. And he thought about it, and he'd seen this little lad, and he went out. The lad went out with a smile on his face, saying, "Yeah, I can do it. I can do it." And the publisher said, "Okay, we'll produce 3 books." What? What do you mean? You can't just say we'll produce 3 books just like that. This takes weeks and all sorts of things. He said, no, it's fine. We'll do 3 books. And so we did. And this is where my wife came into her own, being a creative, artistic primary teacher. She had lots of excellent ideas, and with her and a really good artist friend of ours and a great designer, there were four of them, and they wrote the left-hand writing skills books. And there's a schools version which is all three fully photocopyable. So I was very grateful to have my name on the front. Not that I'd had a great deal of input, but a little. And the that has been absolutely incredible. How many we've sold? They're on sale in Australia and the US and various places. Um, and so we then produced something called a Write mat, which is in fact for left-handers on one side and right-handers on the reverse, um, which is a sort of A3 encapsulated card. So it shows you the different letter formation for the left-hander. And yes, there is different letter formation. Only really the T in the lowercase, it's the crossings.
Hmm.
The left-hander would much rather pull than having to push. And that's one of the bigger problems with handwriting in this country anyway for left-handers is they're having to push from behind the writing, and with the angle of their arm, they can end up smudging it or hooking or all sorts of terrible issues. But it's actually really, really simple to sort out if you know what you're doing. And I fear that one of the issues, particularly with teachers and parents, is in the early years because uh, um, children are using pencil or crayon, that teachers and parents look at what is written and not the how. And the how is absolutely critical. And the number of children we've had coming into the shop was sort of 8 to 12, 13, just starting to use a pen or whatever, finding actually how they're doing it is really causing the problems. They're smudging, they're getting messy hands, getting marked down for poor work. They can't see what they're meant to copy. They got really poor grips. They got pain in the wrist and all, a plethora of issues. And sadly, they aren't getting the help needed to sort it out. Um, yeah, where was I going with that? Can't remember. Never mind. Carry
No,
on.
no, no, no. It sounds great. And so, as if a parent myself, for example, if I was in that position where I was noticing these things coming up, getting hold of the book and actually working through it would actually, I guess, solve that problem without it necessarily having to be the teacher that does it as well. So I think in this sort of day and age, it's sort of heading into that sort of personalized learning and people being more aware. You hope that it happens, like you say, there's something that happens within the government, that it happens within all the teachers and training and classrooms and that kind of thing. But essentially, if you have a child who's left-handed or who's struggling, unable to write as successfully as maybe they'd hope, you can sort of, like say, take the initiative and support them yourself.
That's right. I mean, yes, the books do have instructions on how to help, and I think in retrospect it was helpful in a way that my wife Heather and I are both right-handed because we could look objectively at Robert and say, okay, well, where are the issues? Why is he struggling? For example, with tying shoelaces or ties, that he found that an issue, and so we thought, okay, well, how about Velcro for his shoes? Really useful, really useful. So there are a lot of simple things you can do, and just sitting opposite a child, a left-handed child, so you've got a right-hander sitting opposite, so you sort of do it in a mirror image, can be helpful for those type of things. Or finding a friendly left-hander who can say, "Look, I do it this way. Why
Yeah.
not try it with me?" And you sort the problem out.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And so, on your sort of online site now, what is it that you sell? What is it that you cover? Because I certainly, from I was looking there, it's not just the handwriting and the sort of the stationery side. There are other things as well.
Yes, there are, and there's one further thing I'd like. We also produced a book called "So You Think They're Left-Handed," with a question mark at the end, and that was a really interesting book that having produced the left-hand writing skills, we're then reversed back slightly younger, and I'm doing something as well, even younger than sort of three, but I may mention that later. Um, but if you have a child who you don't know whether they're right or left-handed in the very early years, It's a book that you can use, so it's got various half dozen laterality questions, which you can do on a very low key basis, like the kaleidoscope, that type of thing, to find out which hand, which eye, which foot, and so you can observe, which is really useful from a parent or sort of nursery perspective. And then we've done, again, my wife Heather wrote them, 16 pages of cutting activities at three different levels and 16 pages of pre-letter formation activities, again, at three different levels. So building these things up. And there's a little letter that at the end they can pass on to school as well. So trying to get this movement up. So, if nursery is aware, then they can tell the primary school, and so the help hopefully will go up and raise the awareness as well. But as far as other products, I mean, we have a whole variety of different scissors, nail scissors, kitchen scissors, embroidery scissors, dressmaking scissors, general purpose scissors. There are corkscrews. There are tin openers that are very popular. Corkscrews. If you want to play a joke on a right-handed friend, give them a left-handed corkscrew, but don't tell them it's left-handed. You can have great fun with that. I had a stall at the Three Counties show at Malvern many years ago, and this guy came up and he said, "Can I borrow one of your corkscrews?" I said, "Yeah, that's fine." So I saw him walking up to the end of the tent, and he was asking this guy to open this bottle, and he was turning and turning and turning and turning, and darn thing doesn't open, turning and turning and turning. And then the guy obviously said, "Actually, it's a left-handed one," and you go, but it amused me anyway. So there you go. And there are things like secateurs, left-handed secateurs. There are the rulers, pencil sharpeners, pencil grips. What else have we got? Gosh, all sorts of different things. Cake forks, left-handed cake forks have been very popular.
Yeah, amazing.
Lots
And
of
I guess
things you don't think about.
yeah, and peelers and things like that, which I guess are kind
Yes.
of really important. I mean, they can be hard enough at the best of times if you think you've got the ideal one, let alone say when it doesn't work for
Yes.
you.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Yeah.
So how's it been sort of going from the brick and mortar to the online world? Was it, I mean, I guess it happened through COVID anyway, because that was the way that everybody was doing it. But have you sort of enjoyed that transition, or is there any elements that you miss?
Uh, yes and yes. Yes, I have enjoyed it. It was relatively stressful having the two businesses. I'm sure people who run a small business will appreciate that, with the bricks and mortar and the all the added costs, etc. And it was time for us to close that, and we moved back. And in fact, we moved into our moved the business back home from our cellar, which actually is a bigger office than I had at the shop, so that's nice. Um, so it's worked as well as I would have hoped for, certainly. We've been busy, but not too busy, which is good from my perspective. The one thing I do miss is actually the contact with the people and helping the children. That's what I really miss, but I can't do anything about it, really. Um, that was useful, both from my perspective and the business perspective. And it, from my perspective, it's such a joy to see children going out, and you've given them a whole new lease of life, and you know that it's going to make a real positive difference to them. That's really rewarding. On a purely business perspective, you may have somebody, you tell the parent, "Oh, by the way, I do training for schools," and they hand the leaflet onto the school, and I get some training, and it helps the business.
Mm.
That sadly has, I wouldn't say died a death, but what we have done is last year I produced a new training video. Um, so because obviously the previous one was only in VHS, so we've now got a downloadable interactive training video, which I'm delighted to say is up and running and on the website. And my wife said, you really aren't going to be able to carry on for the rest of your life going out to schools and doing training in person all the time. This would be a really good thing. and obviously it can be used anywhere in the world, which is incredible, absolutely incredible.
Yeah, it's amazing
So yeah.
how these things have changed, like you say, the perspective and also the attention of people from, like say, wherever they happen to be around the world, and the interactivity of those things as well. And have you ever tried doing an online live session, as it were? So sort of having a group of people watching you and doing a workshop in that way round. I just wondered how that works from a kind of a mirroring point of view, or the sort of face-on point of view.
Mm. Good question. I did do one in Zoom and in COVID on Zoom. It didn't really work to my satisfaction. Um, it's the training is very practical, and getting the sort of camera and all that sorted out to get the correct angles and all this sort of thing. It was just, yeah, I found it pretty stressful to do, and say it wasn't fulfilling what I really wanted
Hmm.
to do. Hopefully the video is that there's more clarity to it. Um, Showing how to hold the pencil properly, etc., etc., and the turning the paper. Um, and there are practical things that, for example, cutting out little snails circles. Um, so the people who view the video have to have pencil, paper, and if possible, a pair of scissors. Um, and you can actually stop the video at various points because it's all in sort of chapters, as it were. So if you want to go to laterality questions, chapter two, go to cutting out, chapter whatever. And so you can stop and start. It's not you have to watch the whole thing all through. Uh, um, but and even helping children, I've helped one or two on Zoom, and it really isn't the same as doing it in person. It I guess it's as good as I can do, but doesn't really satisfy my need for really understanding and getting there is nothing like being in front of the person and showing and turning the wrist a little bit or straightening that, or
Mm.
so there's you're sort of limited to a certain degree,
Yeah, I can completely
unfortunately.
identify with that. Yeah, I mean, teaching music on Zoom is a completely different ball game to being able to do it in person. And like I say, just the small
Yeah.
little observations or little things that you can mention, or like I say, little positioning things, which
Mm.
you almost aren't even thinking about in person, is very different when it's online. And it takes you into a whole different world, which yeah, I'm
Yeah.
definitely an in-person point of view from that sort of, especially that sort of one-on-one kind of situation. So yeah.
Yeah.
Is there a piece of advice that you'd like to share with us? And that can be anything personal or professional, but or maybe something, a piece of advice you might give your younger self now looking back.
My younger self, stick with it. Stick with it. Persevere. Give it everything, because, and I think of that when we first opened our shop, um, and my wife, can't remember whether she was working or not, but it was very tough financially, very tough. And but what I wanted was, if the business was to go under, I wanted to know that I'd done everything I could to make it work. And I used to go down Worcester High Street with a banner and saying, "Left-handed, come and see us," you know, all sorts of things. Um, so yes, if you're starting a business, be prepared to work at it, work hard at it, give it everything you can. Um, I'm absolutely flabbergasted that 30 years later, uh, we're still going, which is absolutely brilliant. It's been an amazing journey, and hopefully they'll be going a bit more than that. So yeah, I
Yeah,
think
no,
perseverance.
and help so many
Yeah.
people, which is incredible. If you could, just the journeys of those people as well is incredible. Is there a
Mm.
resource you'd like to share? And I know there's sort of something related to what you've been producing, that you can tell us as well.
Yes, I think the training video really is a resource I'd like to share, and the books. I mean, there's so many things there that can really help and educate both teachers and parents, which will then positively help the children. Um, and anything you can do to help the children is a win-win for everybody. There is no downside to this, and this is what I try telling the MPs, whatever the DFE, and putting on posts. There really is no downside, and there's so many children you're talking about that really aren't getting the help they deserve, and we aren't doing our best for them, and that saddens me, frankly. Hopefully, things are going to change. But yeah, and do something about it if you're a parent of a left-handed child. Go and speak to the teachers, and the teachers do something about it. Don't just talk about it, do something about it. Make that difference, because that little help can change a child's life.
And I think
Easy as that.
yeah, I think what I really love about this is the fact that even if you didn't know what to say, you can now say, look at this download, look at this book, look, even if you're not aware of how these things are, there are things out there which we can make a difference in the here and now. And I think I love like I say, the big picture wanting to change, as we said before, but also actually having a practical step of not just, oh, I wish it was like this, but look, here's something that can make a difference. I'm already maybe doing it at home. I've been experienced to it. I heard it on a podcast. Let's see if we can bring that into the classroom. So yeah, it's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating few last couple of years. I'm a co-founder of a global group that's really starting to make things move, which is really interesting. A little bit sad in a way because there's still some countries that are out there that still force left-handed children to do things right-handed. But there's a great awareness going on, and I think things are starting to change. Certainly, our group is helping raise awareness, and hopefully changing children's lives.
Yeah, incredible. Obviously, the acronym FIRE is important to us here at Education on Fire, and by that we mean feedback, inspiration, resilience, and empowerment. What is it that strikes you when you hear those? And I'm imagining the resilience is definitely one of those, like you said, in terms of that business point of view, and also, like I say, in any kind of struggle.
Gosh, yes. I mean, all of those. I mean, I've given some feedback from the teacher and head teacher. Um, Inspiration, interesting one. Resilience, certainly, and empowerment. Um, you know, there are so many times I think that we write things down, we have good policies, and we can talk about this and that until the cows come home. Um, but it's the action that's got to happen, for our children. Um, but yeah, I think that's yeah, I think that's where I go with that.
So, for those people who are like, I can't believe I didn't know about this before, and where can I get all that support and help that you've been talking about? Where should they go and look?
Okay, thank you. The website is leftshoponline.co.uk. And if anybody wants any help or advice, more than happy to help.
Brilliant. And we'll have links to all of those things on the show notes as well, so people can click through. And so, Mark, thank you so much for being here, sharing your journey and all the massive impact that you've had on so many people. And keep up the great work. And I think it's so important for us to realise that there is something we can do in the here and now, and that there are people out there really sort of supporting people who are in a position that they need help. And it, like I say, if it's not something which is in the forefront of the news, you kind of feel like it's easy to be overlooked. But I think actually championing, like I said, the millions of people and millions of children that need this support on a regular basis is an important thing. And I'm so glad we've been able to share it. So thanks so much indeed.
My pleasure. Thank you, Mark. Much appreciated.
Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire.